So on to building. There are 4 different things, as I've thought and planned today, about how I've gone about starting this. We've talked about the heart response, what God's been sharing, but how has that manifested? What has that looked like as I've gone forward? And I think that there are 4 areas that God has called me as a practitioner to focus on. The first one is to stop calling it work and to start having a shared language. I think that if we reworded the way church websites and job specs were, and we called the adult ministries in our church adult work, I think people would be offended. If we started calling our midweek groups something else, if we, instead of having pastors and vicars, had adult workers, I don't think they'd be happy about it. And yet we call kids work, work. We call youth work, work. And we call adult ministry. That's not shared. The language that we're talking about family and church has separated us. And what is painful to some people and what is obvious to others is that that demonstrates a lack of shared values, a lack of togetherness. Language is one of the main pillars we have to uphold value. The main signpost for I see this and they are together. And whilst our language within kids and youth work is not mirrored within adults work, and hopefully more importantly the adults ministry is not mirrored in the kids and youth, we've already started with a separation. When God revealed that to me many years ago, I went back to my boss and I said, I want my name changed. I want to be called a children's pastor because you're the adults pastor. I believe that the kids deserve a pastor because I'm doing the job. I don't need any more money or any more remit or any more authority. I'm doing what you do for your flock. I'm doing it for this part of your flock. And my boss, absolutely open arms, went, yes, of course. Why wouldn't it be the same thing? It's really important to describe things uniquely, but with the same value. And actually the process of digging out that wrong language, it often unearths the fears. It often unearths the things that people are holding on to that maybe they shouldn't hold on to anymore. Because we're not about devaluing things to make them equal. We're about raising the value of everything. And hopefully just raising the way we explain it because the value is always already there. So the second thing, influence. No more kingdoms. We need to surrender our kingdoms and share them with each other. And by that I mean that being blended, being a church together, means letting others have a voice in your land. For lots of us, and for the way lots of churches are run, we all have these little boundaries. Kids, youth, adults, elderly, students, families, parents. We've got all of these great groups of things, groups of ministries that we're doing. And I absolutely am not saying don't do them. But let's share. Yes, it's safer to say, I am the kids pastor and this is my world and I will create in that everything a child needs. I heard once a kids worker say, you give me your child from 0 to 11 and I will get them where they need to be. That may very well be true. And he was a spectacular kids pastor. But for me, there was a change in the tone. There was an ownership over what he was doing, and there was no way anyone could come in and share. And there was no way he'd left enough space to go out and share the wisdom he had with other people. Because they may be 11 then, but they're going to be 12. And you can imagine, it replicates out. I know being family is so much more than a Sunday morning. But it's a great practical microcosm, as it were, for how this might look. If we want to have meaningful, spirit-filled mornings together, then we need to find ways of combining our different styles. And for that to happen, we need to be in conversation. We need to be saying, this worked really well with the kids. I think the adults would love it. We need to be saying, this song that our teenager shared, I think mini church would think it was awesome. The teaching that the children learn should be learnt by the adults and vice versa. We can be apart, but the influence needs to be shared. We need to learn to be team in a dramatically different way, to be blended. And that's my third point. When we're apart, be strategically apart. Absolutely love having your kids to yourself for a morning. Absolutely love taking the youth off, or the adults, or even separating the adults into smaller demographics. Absolutely love that way of being family. But be strategic. That sharing kingdoms will mean that the way a child does something and the way an adult does something, they could learn from each other. On Sunday, I had a guest preacher coming in, and she did an amazing job, and she asked if I would take the ministry. And it was one of those times when we just all needed to debrief. I knew she was going to bring a lot to hear, and it was in a blended service. And so I taught the whole church how mini church listen. And we grab a spot, and we put our head on the floor, and we listen for 30 seconds. These are 2 to 5s. 30 seconds is doing well. And we have a question, and we ask directly our Daddy God what something looks like. How does that feel? What do you say? And we spend 30 seconds debriefing. And we wait. And then in the smaller context of mini church, we debrief corporately. Well, we did that in our blended service. The whole of us, some of us laid on the floor, some adults didn't. That's okay. We all spent 30 seconds debriefing with our dad, taking what we'd heard, putting it in our heads, and asking him to shunt it into our hearts in whatever way he wanted to do for us individually. That wouldn't have happened if I hadn't shared my little mini church kingdom with my big church kingdom. It wouldn't have happened if the adults weren't willing and excited to learn what kids' church were learning. And it wouldn't have happened if the little ones weren't willing to show an adult what it looked like to lie on the floor with your head on a spot. It's simple, but it worked because God turned up and his kingdom said yes, and therefore on earth we said yes. So when we're apart, be strategic in how we format and create those programs so that they dovetail. So that number 4, when we're together, we can reap the benefits. We need time together to experiment. There are some things that I've tried when we've been all together that have absolutely bombed. They were brilliant in kids' church, but you get everyone together and kids' church were nervous and the adults didn't quite know if they were audience or participant, and it was a disaster. But we're family. That's literally part of the plan. I want to take risks that mean that we can all give it a go. One of the things I've learned through the blended journey is how similar the needs of the age line and the runway to Jesus, how similar those two sets of needs are. It really surprised me as God started to reveal that the changes I made to the way I worked with adults so that kids could be a part were actually the changes that our visitors needed. Those, Jay Pathak says, uninitiated members of our church families. They've not been around for long enough. They may feel in, but they don't know the language yet. When we change to include all ages, already the shift has happened to include all that way too. And that's been really transformative for my passion for blended. I thought I was passionate when it was all age, but the fact that actually this is missional, this is how we turn our church family into something that includes anyone, no matter how close they feel to Jesus. well, I just got more excited. I just got more passionate. I just want to try an extra thing. What if we try that? And in our church, that's actually been one of the biggest shifts. For those not engaged with loving the whole family, age-wise, they're probably engaged with loving the runway of all the different stages. Maybe that's how we communicate to some people who think they don't share our heart, and yet actually they do. So I want to look at one example. And I have picked a Sunday morning one. Again, because it's a nice, simple microcosm, and probably, I'm guessing, something that is found in a lot of contexts that you guys represent. Because when it comes to what outreach looks like as a blended family or midweek discipleship, there's just so many different options. You guys are doing so many different things. I couldn't possibly hope to pick something that had enough of a link. So I've picked worship because I guessed at some point our families are doing that. So, again, I like the number 4. There are 4 or 5 things here. The first one is in preparation. So if we're going to be a blended family who worship together, we literally need to learn all the same songs. We need to sing off the same songbook. And so within our context, within the kids and youth ministry that I run, we changed what we sang. And we asked the adults to do the same, and we created a hybrid. I put forward some songs, and the adult worship pastor created a list. We have 35. I should have asked him. I don't know of the spiritual significance of 35. Maybe it's a good number. It's enough to pick from, but not too many. But we have 35 songs in our church, and they go on rotation. Sometimes they get rotated off and a new one comes in. But we have, on average, 35 songs that the youth, kids, minis, and adults use to worship. And that means that when we're all together, we can sing. We've raised kids who know that if there's a word that they don't understand, just don't sing it. God is listening, so just sing what you understand. Mini church, they do have other songs as well. They're really teeny. They need songs that look a bit different for them too, but we use the songbook, as it were, in their soaking time, in their music that builds atmosphere so that they feel at home with those songs. It's been a massive icebreaker, as it were, to bring unity to all ages. Because when you can sing, you can join in. And again, it also means that our songs are picked really wisely. Are they appropriate for the whole age range? Are they appropriate for every single person in that building, whether they've ever encountered God's word or not? We have some amazing, amazing songs that we haven't picked because they don't make sense if you haven't been to church regularly for a while. So we prepare to be together. Secondly, we train apart and together. Like I said, it's about having conversations. So we help our kids understand about how you pick songs, that you can pick songs based on what God wants to hear. You can pick songs on what you need God to hear. We help the teenagers be a part of the tech and the band, as well as what it looks like to lead worship as a member of the congregation. And if I'm honest, sometimes I've not trained the adults. I've assumed that they've been around long enough to learn all of that stuff. But actually, as we've equipped their kids, parents have started saying, hey, I didn't know that was why. So maybe I need to train the adults a bit more too. And as part of that, we signpost. So we signpost what we're doing, and because of the image, people will start to learn why by how we explain it. In kids' church, I used to have a slide, and it would be like multifaceted. So it would have a colour per element, it would have a picture, and it would have words and a Bible verse. And the sort of idea was that for those who were teeny and could only recognise the colour, they knew blue, worship. For those who wanted a picture, they had something to sort of conjure up the idea of like worship. They then had the title, worship, and we had a Bible verse about what worship was, about spirit and in truth. And as the signposting has developed, we've stripped a lot of that back. That was, in essence, me overthinking things about 6 times over. And we've created really simple, just PowerPoint slides that we use. And we actually use them in adult church now, as well as kids' church, so that the adults are using a format that the kids' church use, so that together the adults aren't going, hey, we don't normally have that. And the kids feel at home because, hey, I know what that means. And in worship, it's been really interesting because the traditional, more contemporary model is to have a big block, and you'll sort of do this journey through. You'll have a worship leader and he'll lead you through. And that is brilliant. But actually, there are lots of people in our churches who don't know the jargon of the journey. And so we've started breaking it down a little bit more. And we now have something called prep to worship. So before the worship leader comes up, or maybe even the worship leader does it, we have a slide and we have lots of options of what they might look like. And I'm just going to talk about one of them today. So one of the ways we prep for worship is we have a dumper truck. And before even a note has been strummed, I talk about the fact that we are designed to worship God in spirit and in truth. But sometimes, by the time we get to a Sunday morning, we are all full of junk and all full of precious stones and all full of plans. And those things, on the most part, are brilliant. God loves us being full. But the best way to worship him is to choose to empty ourselves. But God doesn't want us to throw our precious stuff on the floor. He wants us to dump it on him. So we now have like a graphic of a dumper truck. I think you'll probably see it at some point. And it's this image of a truck that you can put your stuff on. All the good stuff that's happening in your life that you're thankful for. All the stuff you're worried about. You can dump on God your plans. You can dump on God your excitement and your fear and your worry. You can dump it all on him because he is trustworthy and he will look after it. So that you are set to get ready to worship. Stripped back and ready with your spirit to engage with God's truth. And from that place of that tiny little explanation, that moment of a imagination exercise, that's when the worship comes in. And I'd been doing this in kids' church for years. When I finally plucked up the courage, is probably the truth, to do it in the adult congregation. And I had a mum come up to me afterwards, and she'd been a Christian for longer than I'd been alive. And she had been in that church for years. And it was a very contemporary, lots of strumming, lots of getting ready, and then going for it. And she came to me and she said, I've never known how to join in with the beginning. I did not understand why we didn't just start singing. I didn't get that I needed to get ready. And I worshipped for those 2 songs more than I've ever done for half an hour. And it was a real humbling moment of, I did something because of this line. And yet adults were massively blessed by my blended approach. Now, I very deliberately use a dumper truck and not the cross. Because what we do at the end of worship is we talk about the fact that as we move from worship, we can pick stuff back off God. And because this is a training tool, do you know what? It's okay if you pick your worries back off God, not because he shouldn't keep them, not because we want them to stay with him, but because sometimes in the middle of the week, even when we've given it to God, we find ourselves worrying about it. And I want the kids to know that that's not a failure. Just because you gave it to God and you happen to take it back, that's okay. We'll just give it to God again. So it's a training tool. It's not necessarily a ministry theological idea. We have a picture of corridors with lots of doors. Do we shut the door to school and the door to thinking and the door to worries and the door to fear and just leave the door to Jesus open? We have a pause button. We're going to pause the world and press play on heaven. There are loads that we do. And they've really opened up worship to everyone to be a blended experience. And as I've probably suggested, we experiment. We try new things. I've got a whole hit list of stuff we haven't tried yet, but we will get to it because it's exciting to try something new. And sometimes the wisest way is to experiment in separate groups, so at least one of them has got a plan. So the ministry example of mini church, I knew that there were 6 3-year-olds in that room who knew what I was talking about. That makes me feel braver. And so it goes on. Sometimes we'll just give it a go altogether. We'll see what happens. And of course, the key is following God's lead, in choosing to have a prophetic ministry that sticks close to what he's saying and pursuing his heart. So as I round up, I just want to share with you a few things that I ponder and I treasure as I journey this stuff through. It'll sound a strange thing to say, having spent however long saying how brilliant blended is. But for me, the point of blended is not a destination. It's a mode of transportation. It's about loving that we are on the journey together more than pursuing how far we could go apart. As parents, we'll naturally know that if you go somewhere, you're at the speed of your slowest person. That's been a fear in the church for so long. Do we really have to go at the speed of the slowest person? That's not what blended is. Blended is going together at different speeds. It's going together at different ages and at different places of relationship with God and with each other. Jesus left really clear instructions before he left earth. You know, that awesome pep talk of the Great Commission. And this is how I've heard it said and how I engage with it right now. Whilst you're journeying towards the purposes our dad has given you, take others along for the ride, teach them what I've taught you, and be confident because I'm with you. Becoming a blended family isn't what we're called to do. It's who we're called to be. God has plans on all of our lives, and he has designs for glorious living on each one of the contexts and communities that he's placed you in. I can't begin to understand how different blended might look where you are. But I believe that way of getting to where you're going will be enhanced by doing it together. Like any good church, we love God and we want to be with him and we want to be around him. And the more we can include people, the more exciting that's going to become. The more people we have in our family meaningfully, the more of God we will reflect as each of us pick up different facets of his personality. So I know that you'll have follow-up questions in a session a bit later, but I've just got 3 for you right now to hopefully help you start making what I've said personal to you and your dad. So this is the first one. How does your dad describe to you the church family he has for you? What creative ways does he use to talk to you and to impart to you a vision for what he has? Secondly, what could that look like in your context and in your community? What difference would it make for that way of heaven reaching earth? And thirdly, back to the image of the prism. How can all the refracted colours influence the whole rainbow? It's been such a delight to share with you what God is mulling with me, and I'm so excited to see what he plants and grows and develops through the nation because of this conference, because of all these amazing people who are sharing. And I'm excited for what you and your dad are going to do with his family. Thank you.